Hunter, Eagles play this Sunday. People hear the action right here on 97.3 ESPN. Tony Bruno's kind of kick off at 1 o'clock, which you are a producer of. As the producer of Tony Bruno's show, I want to ask your first shot opinion about what do you think the conversation is going to be this weekend about this Eagles-Seahawks game?
It has to be the quarterbacks. It's got to be Carson Wentz going up against Russell Wilson. This is Carson Wentz's first playoff game. He's at home. Now, we all understand the situation. We all understand the circumstances when it comes to what he's working with at the skill positions. It's been flowing, though. It's not as if they haven't been producing. They have been producing, but you still need to have that in the back of your mind. But I don't know what other conversation can really take over Carson Wentz versus Russell Wilson.
I understand what you're saying. I think that we are overlooking, though, the fact that both of these teams have numerous injuries.
So injuries versus injuries?
Yeah. So whose depleted team is good enough to win on Sunday? Because let's be realistic. We know about the Eagles' injuries, but people don't know about the fact that, again, the starting left tackle, the best offensive line for the Seahawks, out. Jadeveon Clowney's playing, but he's been playing through a core injury. Michael Kendricks out for the season, tore up his knee.
He should be in jail. What is the situation with that, by the way?
Well, they keep postponing the hearing date, and there's all this procedural nonsense going on with that. But there's all these layers, right, with the Seahawks of all these injuries. They've had injuries in their secondary. They acquired Diggs, the corner, from the Lions earlier this year. He got injured for part of the year now. The Seahawks' injuries are almost as many as the Eagles. So to me, that's the second storyline. The second storyline has to be whose injuries is going to impact that team more.
That's absolutely fair. I think people just don't want to go with the narrative of injuries. It's more like that's looking at it as a negative way to look at it. Well, both teams are banged up. I think the reason why I go with Carson versus Russell Wilson is because it's more of a positive storyline. Here are two quarterbacks. We argue that Carson Wentz is at the top of the league. Russell Wilson is at the top of the league. And let's see who can provide the most spark for their squad, who can lead their squad down the field enough to win the football game. So I think that's why maybe people don't like to use injuries as excuses, I guess, is what I'm looking at. So maybe that's why people stay away from that conversation, even though we all know in the back of our minds that it is a big-time factor.
All right, let me give you another matchup then, if you want to say put the injuries further in a list. We know the Eagles' defense is much better at home versus the road. We've documented this for weeks now, whether it's here on Mason Eytan or the Sports Bash with Mike Gill, or whether it's you on the Pete Thompson Show. So Jim Schwartz, the Eagles' defensive coordinator, versus the Seahawks' offensive coordinator, Brian Schottenheimer, who's rolling into Philadelphia with Marshawn Lynch and Robert Turbin off the street, and Russell Wilson, a banged-up offensive line, and a secondary that, after DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, most people don't even know who these guys are. So is that a matchup that you would say should be number 2 then?
I love that you mentioned this because the last few weeks it was all about the running back. Ezekiel Elliott and Saquon Barkley. You needed to stop those two. If you don't stop those two, they're going to move the chain. They're going to have the time of possession. It's going to be a tough night for the Eagles. This situation is all about Jalen Mills, which I think is going to go, by the way, Sidney Jones, Rasul Douglas, those guys, versus DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, which are their playmakers. They don't have that running back. Now, that doesn't mean you allow them to run the football down your throats, because that's no recipe for success either. But you need to find a way to be creative and stop the run while focusing on their playmakers, because their playmakers this week is the wide receivers. They are the wide receivers. It's not the running back. So, yes, I do think Jim Schwartz is going to be a big-time conversation going into this one.
The Eagles have one of the best defenses at home in the NFL. And I think that gets overlooked because of the fact that during that losing streak, most of those games were at home. When they were on that losing streak, Patriots, Seahawks, those games were at home. They lost to the Lions at home earlier this year. So I think that people tend to overlook the fact that the Eagles' defense has performed at a high level.
According to John McMullen, our very own John McMullen, they have the fewest points allowed per game at home since 2016, including the playoffs, at 16.1. That's really impressive.
But people still want to blame Jim Schwartz like he's the problem.
Well, it's funny because the last 3 years or so, I did not like Jim Schwartz, but this season has changed my outlook on him completely.
What is it that has changed your outlook?
I think he's done different things. Like he's definitely bringing more pressure at times. He's giving different looks. He's being more creative, I think, with the defense. And because he had no options at one point, when we were picking guys off the street to play corner, he had to send the blitz. He had to send these different looks. And maybe that changed his mindset. And he realized, wow, I can do some different things. Instead of being stubborn, just playing the sticks all the time, he's doing things that create a mental spot for the opposing squads. Like he'll
makes them think.
Exactly. Right. He'll pull out on coverage and send the blitz. Oh no, they're pulling out right before the snap. There's so many different looks he's giving.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that because we saw in college football last weekend a coordinator who's a little bit similar to Schwartz have some initial problems with a team, and that was Brent Venables of Clemson. Venables, like Schwartz, typically doesn't have his defense set what they're doing immediately on the good line of scrimmage. There's a lot of changing. There's a lot of shifting. Malcolm Jenkins, one of the defensive play callers, you'll see him running around a lot, changing things up on the guys. You see the quarterback make a change. I'm interested to see if the Seahawks decide to go hurry up, which they can. We saw that kid Homer, the running back, the rookie, be a big part of that hurry up for them on Sunday night versus the 49ers. I'm mixing up my teams now, so I'm trying to keep it all straight. But we saw Homer use a lot in the hurry up. Is that a way to neutralize what the Eagles defense has done? I think that's an interesting question. I think another interesting question is when you look at the Seahawks offense, we all look at Russell Wilson. But after Russell Wilson, are we really that worried about the Seahawks offense? Like, I get it, Marshawn Lynch is a name, but he didn't have the greatest game in the world. And you could argue that he was tired as all heck after that game. So, is he really going to be beast mode coming into Philadelphia? I think some of what we look at the Seahawks and assume that they are is because of Russell Wilson. But, Russell Wilson isn't playing with a full deck either.
I agree. And I mentioned this. I think it comes down to their playmakers who, they're DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. So it's not just Russell Wilson because those guys, they make plays too. But I want to throw something at you here. Pete Carroll made some mistakes at the end of that San Francisco 49ers game.
Sure.
He allowed a delay of game to occur. Just another spot where he fails at the end zone at the end of a game.
Just bizarre, dumb mistakes.
And he's a great coach in this league. There's no doubt about it. You can't knock the man. He is a very smart coach when it comes to football. Players love playing for him. He's doing something right. But if this game came down to coaching, who would you give the nod to?
That's a great question because when you look at both head coaches have won Super Bowls. Both coaches have been criticized for their in-game mistakes.
Yeah, now to be fair, Doug Peterson makes mistakes too. I'm not saying
I'm saying both of them have.
Yeah.
Both have been criticized for their in-game mistakes. Both of them are considered player coaches. So I think there's a lot of similarities that can be brought in. I think the biggest thing that Doug has that Pete doesn't, though, is that Doug's message is fresher. Remember when Richard Sherman left Seattle, he talked about how the message was getting stale from Pete Carroll, the rah-rah, all that. Well, Pete's been around the league with the Seahawks now for, a decade? So Doug is in year 4. I think that maybe for these guys who are on the Eagles, they haven't heard the mantra as many times. And maybe the message will be a little bit fresher in their mind than Pete Carroll jumping up and down and, I love Pete. Don't get me wrong. I think Pete is a fun guy. You could argue he's one of the 5 best coaches in the NFL, but you have to admit that his coaching style is very unique. And it does lean a little more college style than it does NFL style. So it can wear on the veterans a little bit, as guys like Earl Thomas and Richard Sherman have said in interviews, and the fact that, okay, we get it. We're all supposed to be excited. We're all supposed to get up for the game. Let's go. Let's have fun. I think Doug is a little more practical with his motivation for the team. And also, Doug is not just Doug. I think it's the players in the locker room. We've heard about guys like Jason Kelsey and Malcolm Jenkins and others getting up in the locker room, talking to guys, getting in guys' faces, getting the guys ready. So I think if I have to give an edge to Peterson, I think it's the message.
I like that. I like that a lot. And I was leaning towards the same thing. And another thing that has to be factored in is the guys the message is going to. And when you have players like Greg Ward, Boston Scott, Rob Davis, Josh Perkins, these players are fighting for their lives. And they're fighting for their NFL lives. Right. They know when they're out there, this is a lot of experience. There's people that are going to be watching on tape if they do end up getting cut from the Eagles one day down the line. So when they hear someone like Doug Peterson sending them this message, I feel like they grab onto it more as well. You kind of alluded to it when you discussed the veterans on the Seahawks side. And I think when you look at it from the Eagles' perspective, you have these players that are doing every little thing and are willing to do so much that when Doug Peterson gives them this message, they are more than just embracing it. They're making it almost a lifestyle, if you will.
609-403-0973 is the text word. Again, the conversation. Josh, Hennig, Hunter Brody filling in for Mays and Eytan. Just one day. They'll be back tomorrow here on 97.3 ESPN. Again, text board 609-403-0973. Of course, also in the NFL this week, coaching moves. According to reports, Eric Bieniemy, the offensive coordinator for the Chiefs, is going to be interviewing in Carolina today and tomorrow. They're going to try to go after Josh McDaniels. Mike McCarthy is making the rounds. He's pretty much interviewing for every job out there at this point. But the one job that we thought would be open by now, Jason Garrett is still the head coach, technically, of the Dallas Cowboys. Now, his contract's expired, but he's still in the building, meeting with Jerry Jones. Have you ever heard of a stranger situation than this Garrett-Jones thing? Because
yes, Gabe Kapler. The Gabe Kapler situation is the same exact thing.
But Kapler wasn't hanging around the building when his contract expired.
Yeah, I guess you're right.
It's not like Clintack and Kapler are still meeting when everybody thinks he's going to be fired for 3 straight days. According to Ed Werner, Jones and Garrett are resuming meetings now. People inside the building, this is Ed Werner's tweet from just a few minutes ago. The building has begun to wonder if Garrett is going to have a role in the 2020 Cowboys, whether as a head coach or in another capacity.
I was under the impression that there's no way that this guy stays. Now I'm wondering if Jerry Jones is discussing with Jason Garrett. I never thought that maybe he could be in the organization elsewhere. I thought the conversations at this point can be, what do we need to do? What do we need to do? Do you want more power? Do you want to do this? Do you want to do that? What if we brought you these guys? Like, I wonder if they're trying to find a way to make this work and surgically repair this thing with keeping Jason Garrett involved at the top.
It's so strange, man. It's so weird. Like I've never thought I'd see the day where the most obvious move is the thing is not happening. Like the guy's contract expired. Like my original theory on New Year's Eve, I should say. I tweeted at Adam Capital, be joining Mike Gill and Jeff Mosher and Ryan today at 3 p.m. I said, maybe Jerry's just waiting for everyone's contracts to expire and just not activate their key cards kind of thing. Like, yeah,
I thought that was a good mindset, right. A reasonable thing to think about.
Like, instead of firing everybody, it's like, well, your contract expired. I didn't have to fire anybody. I just didn't renew anybody's contract, But he's still hanging around the building. He's still talking. He's still negotiating or whatever they're doing. I am in awe that we could be on the road to the Cowboys literally turning into the biggest dumpster fire of the offseason. Because if Jason Garrett is still in that building in any capacity, I think that there might be actually coaches who won't want to go there to coach. I think that we saw in that Chris Richard, his interview with the Giants, their de facto D coordinator, who really wasn't a D coordinator, he was just calling the back half of the defense. If Jason Garrett is not the head coach, but he's in the front office, let's say, if you're a head coach coming in there, do you really want to be the head coach of the Cowboys then? Because you have that guy looking over your shoulder.
Right. Now, we got a couple of texts coming in saying that Garrett's contract actually doesn't expire until the 14th of January. So a couple more weeks, but it's still odd. No matter no matter what, it's still odd that he's hanging around there when everybody's having the discussion on Jason Garrett, and everyone knows that he should not be the head coach anymore. It's just that simple. So no matter if it's still no matter if the contract is still there or not, or still in play or not, the move is to get rid of this guy because for the past 10 years they've done nothing.
I will only say this about the Jason Garrett contract. Ed Warner on SportsCenter on New Year's Eve specifically stated that there's a bunch of people who are coaches whose contract expired January 1st. So now if Garrett's contract may be different, that's fine. I was just going off of what Ed Warner reported. So, but even if Garrett's contract isn't until January 14th, I'm with you. What are you waiting for? Like, I get it. Like, you have loyalty to this guy, you like this guy, and all that good jazz. But at some point, you got to make a decision. You got to be decisive. If you read Gary Myers' book on the Cowboys and Jerry Jones, I have Gary Myers on a few months ago, and he talks about in the book about when they drafted Zach Martin instead of Johnny Manziel, that Jerry took his son, Stephen Jones, aside and said, as long as you're making this pick, not because it's the safe pick, but because it's the right pick, I'm okay with it. Because I don't want you making decisions for this franchise moving forward, personnel decisions for players, with making the safe move or the easy move or something you don't have a lot of conviction about. I think Jerry is contradicting himself. I think Jerry keeping Jason around is the easy, soft move, the safe move, and I think Jerry's afraid to step out into the wide blue yonder.
It's as if he doesn't want to hurt his feelings almost. And Josh, I like you. You're a good guy. If I was an owner of a football team and you were my head coach for 10 years and you gave me what Jason Garrett gave the Cowboys, I would look at you in the eyes, shake your hand, and say, thank you for everything you did for this organization. I love you a lot as a person.
Get out.
But this isn't working out. But you would understand, too. You saw Jason Garrett's reaction, the way he addressed the locker room afterwards, just his body language, his facial expression. He knows it's time as well. So this shouldn't be that hard of a decision.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this gets down to, like you said, Jerry Jones is afraid. He's afraid to pull the trigger. He's afraid to make a decision. And frankly, that's a soft move by Jerry. Frankly, Jerry's being soft. He always preaches about toughness and hardness. He's all grizzled with his face. Looks like it's been, worn out through the years of, excess partying and drinking. We got to go out there and we got to play tough. Well, you're not being tough, Jerry. You got to grow up and get with the program.
Let me ask you this: if he brought Dak Prescott in there, Zeke. So what do you guys think? Jason Witten, what do you guys think? What if they are supporting Jason Garrett and said, we think he can do the job if he's surrounded by the right people? Now you're stuck in a position where your players are saying, listen, I don't mind this guy, but we do need to make some adjustments, but I don't mind Jason Garrett. He's not the issue. We love playing for him.
Well, my question to come back at you is then, you brought in a new offensive coaching staff this offseason. You brought in Kellen Moore. You brought in John Kitna. What other changes need to be made?
And that's a very fair response to that. I'm just thinking on, how is this possible? I'm trying to logically break this down. How is this possible that he is not fired yet? Maybe that is something that occurred behind closed doors.
609-403-0970. We have a Redskins fan chiming in and says, Josh, as a loyal Redskins fan, I like the direction they're going in now. Instant competition to the NFC East. Dallas is becoming a dumpster fire. Giants up there also. Eagles have warts. Your opinions.
Instant competition to the NFC East? Do you think that that's a little bit far stretched?
No, I don't, because they're hiring Jack Del Rio. And every place Jack Del Rio has gone as a head coach or a head coach, he has made that defense a top 5 caliber defense. Whether it was when he was in Carolina or he went to Jacksonville, when he was in Denver with that defense. Remember, that defense got them to the Super Bowl. That's a caliber of winning Super Bowl defense. He goes to Oakland, improves their defense immediately. I think he's going to walk into Washington with the talent that they have on defense. Guys like Jonathan Allen and Ryan Kerrigan and all those athletes that they have. And he's going to turn them into a high-caliber defense. And I think it's a threat for the Eagles.
I think they're in the right direction, but I'm not ready to say their organization has completely changed and now that they are capable of making runs instantly right off the top of this hire. Ron Rivera has 9 seasons as a head coach.
Yes.
He has been over 500 3 times. Now, I think it's a good hire. I'm not trying to downplay Ron Rivera. He's smart. He went to the Super Bowl 15-1 that year. But I do think maybe his name brings this look to him that is more than what it really is. I mean, 6 times he's under 500 with a roster in Carolina that is pretty damn good. Let's not say that it's just average. It's a good roster. it's a nice hire. I think it's a good hire for the Redskins based off of what they have been throughout the past few years and all that, more than just a few years, for a long time. But I don't think it's automatically, here they come, here they are. They're ready to start competing for the NFC East every year because of this duo that they now have.
And Glenn chimes in and says, guys, don't forget, Jerry Jones fired a legend in Tom Landry and Jimmy Johnson. So are we saying that he's gone soft in his later years? He's shown in the past he's able and willing to move on from successful coaches. It makes you wonder what the holdup is for moving on Garrett. I think Blendo brings up a great point, though. You fire Tom Landry. Now, Landry was near the end at that point. So that was more of a justifiable firing of, like, look, we need some new blood in here. Tom, we're going in a different direction. Because when Jerry bought the team, he looked at Landry as the old, and he wanted to bring in the new. The Jimmy Johnson thing was totally about Jerry's ego. I want credit for the Super Bowl. I don't want you to have credit for the Super Bowl. That kind of garbage. So that's a good question. Is Jerry getting soft in his old years? What is holding him back from moving on from Garrett? And I think for me at least, Hunter, it comes down to the fact that Garrett is Jones's guy. Garrett is the guy that Jones put into the coaches' meeting so he can learn about coaching. He's the guy that he told Wade Phillips, you need to hire this guy. When he got rid of Wade Phillips, he ascended Garrett immediately. Didn't even do a coaching search. So Jones has looked at this guy as his coach or his future coach and now his coach for so long that I think that there's a little bit too much familiarity. There's a little bit too much. Jones calls him as part of the family. Well, I get it, but if I have a family member, a brother, a sister, a son, a nephew, and they're not doing a good job at my business, I can't keep them just because it's family. I either give them a different job or I send them on their way and give them a recommendation to go somewhere else. I think that maybe Glenn's right, and I said it earlier. Maybe Jones is getting soft. I think that he's not being objective in his old age.
Is it soft if he believes that he can actually get the job done? I would
but
think
he hasn't.
But my point is, if Jerry Jones is sitting there thinking he can get the job done, they did win the division last year. They won a playoff game. They have the talent on the roster. If he's sitting there believing that Jason Garrett can win, is it soft to not do it? I think the way to describe soft would be, all right, I don't think this guy is it, but I'm going to keep him anyway. To me, that's soft because you don't want to hurt the guy's feelings. You don't want to make him feel bad. He's part of the family, as you said. But if Jerry Jones believes this is the guy, I don't think the word soft is the way to describe it.
Then what would you use? What's the word that you would use then?
He's in denial on Jason Garrett's what he can actually bring to the table. Because I don't believe he can get the job done.
Okay,
He's
so
just
is
not
he,
seeing talent well enough.
Is he in denial, like someone loves somebody and they can't admit that the person's been cheating on them kind of relationship thing?
Perfect.
Okay.
But is that soft or is that being twisted in the mind and you're not really developing the proper senses on certain situations?
It could be a little bit of both.
Okay. I'm looking at the word soft differently. Soft to me is you don't want to hurt someone's feelings. But I think Jerry Jones looks at Jason Garrett and says, I've seen him have 10-6 seasons. I've seen him make the playoffs. Maybe he can get it done if we surround him at the right spots. I don't know. I'm trying to think of anything other than just, I'm just trying to process on why this is happening. And I'm looking at every direction possible when looking at Jason Garrett and Jerry Jones communicating every day and not coming up with an answer on if he's going to be here or not.
Okay, well, let me ask you this question then. Is this also have something to do with the fact that Glenn brought up Jones is getting older? Is there a part of Jones that is trying to, for lack of a better term, make this work because he feels like it needs to work for his own, legacy or something like that?
It's possible. I would think with where he is at his age, he understands how much time is left when it comes to getting a Super Bowl. So I don't know if that really correlates with each other. To me, if that's the idea, that he's running out of time when it comes to being the leader of this organization, you would think making the move is the next step because he needs to make that powerful push to get over the hump.
By the way, Jane Slater, who covers the Cowboys for the NFL Network, she come out with this update. Jason Garrett hasn't finished all of his exit interviews with players and coaches. There are players who have not yet met with him. Well, maybe because he's been meeting with Jerry Jones so much, he hasn't gotten around to the players. Like, maybe that's part of the reason why. Maybe he's spending so much time running upstairs talking to Jerry that he hasn't gotten around to finishing all of his exit interviews. He is neglecting his job as head coach because his owner is having an emotional, twisted time breaking up with his lover.
Who do you blame? Who's to blame in this?
Both.
Yeah, I agree. Both.
At some point, Jason's got to go to Jerry and be like, Jerry, I kind of need to do my job. Like, I know we're spending a lot of time together talking about things and reminiscing about the good old days, but at some point, you gotta let me go do my job. And Jerry's got to have the foresight to stop being so, ridiculous. I mean, I get it. This is a guy who loves to be out in front of the microphones. He loves to be heard and seen. And I get it. He loves drama. But at some point, let the guy go do his job and then figure out his future.
Well, this tells me if Jerry Jones is taking him away from the exit meetings, don't you think he's gone as head coach?
That's an interesting twist. Right now, elaborate on that a little bit.
I'm just thinking if Jerry Jones is saying, don't worry about that stuff. And who knows if he's saying that or not. Like I said, I'm trying to look at every different road right now, and it's hard to because there's so many different ways to look at this and process it. It just doesn't make sense. But the way my mind works is I'm trying to dive into this in every different direction and see what can possibly be happening. If Jerry Jones is consistently bringing Jason Garrett upstairs and saying, don't worry about the meetings, let's figure this out first because it's more important, that would tell me that he's leaning towards getting rid of Jason Garrett more than it is keeping him, because if he was keeping him, he would say, finish out those meetings. They're important. You're the head coach here. Figure that out, and then we will have our discussions.
That is an interesting working theory. I'm not going to say you're wrong, but I think it's interesting. Rob from Absecon chimes in at 609-403-0973. He says the word he would use is sentimental.
It's a good word.
That Jones is being sentimental with Jason Garrett. That's why he won't get rid of him yet.
That's why a lot of people say don't work with family, because it's two different things.
Yeah.
Two different things.
You get too emotionally involved, which is different than Jeffrey Lurie when he said emotional intelligence.
Oh, that's a classic. I wish we had the sound drop of that.
Sorry, I had to bring it back to the Eagles there for a hot second. But by the way, did I mention that Hunter is wearing an Eagles hat and an Eagles Super Bowl hoodie?
You did mention that. Is that wrong of me to do that?
No,
okay.
I just think it's an interesting choice of attire, knowing that you're going to be on the air with me today. You are aware of the fact that I bring up people's attire on the radio, and I notice things like that.
Well, I have on my Philly Unite Sixer shirt underneath, and Philly Unite is in one tough pickle right now. Losing 3 straight. Again. I don't know what to say about this team. Very frustrating. Brett Brown is under the hot seat right now. He should be on the hot seat. There are some interesting quotes, Josh, from Josh Richardson and Al Horford. Did you hear them?
I read them before, and it was one of those deals where I read them and kind of just like,
swept it under?
Yeah, swept it under. But now that you've brought them back up to me again, I think there's a little bit more. Because, I've been watching football and bowl games, and the only time I get to anything that's not that is typically the Flyers at night. The Flyers on a West Coast trip, and usually the Flyers have been on this week. It's when all the bowl games are done.
The Walgreens Rite Aid CVS Bowl really caught your attention this weekend?
Yes, it did. Orange Bowl, Sugar Bowl, Rose Bowl, Citrus Bowl, but I know you're making fun of me now. That was all good. I've actually watched a little less Sixers than I usually would. Outside the Pacers game on Tuesday, I've actually watched more Flyers in the last week than Sixers.
Wow, how about that? I've been the actual opposite. I've missed the last couple Flyers games because of the West Coast trip. We talked about how the NHL does a poor job of scheduling games. One of those Flyers games was actually right after the Eagles game, and I had to get my stuff done for the Eagles, so I missed the Flyers. But we'll get to Josh Richardson's quote here. He says, I don't think that there's enough accountability in the locker room right now, honestly. I think we got some new guys who don't want to step on toes, including myself. I feel like we just kind of go out and don't compete as much. There have been games where we have, and it's been great, but when it's not going good, we got to hold each other accountable. So I think that's where a lot of our problems start. Now, when he talks about not stepping on people's toes, when the new guys are not stepping on people's toes, is that not Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons to you?
You mean like the guys who are already there, not setting,
right? Like
the
I would
standard.
say, Tobias is new, even though he was here last year. He's a new face. Josh Richardson is new. Al Horford is new. When he's talking about not stepping on anyone's toes, it's Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid. So, and for him to talk about how there's not enough accountability in the locker room, he's looking at Brett Brown, and I lean towards supporting Brett, but this is why I do that, because I don't think he gets enough credit for what he does. I just think he's a good NBA coach. I don't think he's a great NBA coach. I don't think he's an elite NBA coach. I think he's just a good NBA coach. But if you heard majority of this city, he's the worst coach who ever lived on the face of the earth in basketball. So that's why I lean towards supporting him more. I get why the Sixers would need to move on, but if you go through all the changes that happened last year, trading for Jimmy Butler, trading for Tobias Harris, moving Markelle Fultz, moving Robert Covington, then the following offseason, you get Al Horford, you get Josh Richardson. Now, in this season, you want to trade a move on from a head coach?
I'm a big believer in that everyone wants to get rid of Brett Brown, and I get that. But at some point, you have to admit the players got to play better. The sloppy, dumb turnovers, the lack of spacing at times. Like, there'll be times that Benson's going to come to the floor, and, like, Joel Embiid and Tobias are both within, 5 feet of him.
Well, the Brett Brown haters will say that that's Brett's problem. The reason why they're turning the ball over is because of Brett. The reason why the spacing is bad is because of Brett's system. I'm just playing devil's advocate with you, even though I do believe I believe you. This is the thing. When the Sixers play bad, and if Ben Simmons is horrendous, Al Horford is awful, Joel Embiid is terrible, the response is always, oh, I can't believe Brett Brown is the coach. He lost the game. Why do these players get a free pass? Ben Simmons played terrible. Al Horford played atrocious. Why do they just get a free pass because you individually don't like the head coach?
And that's part of the problem. I think there's a part of the fan base, because those, and not everybody, but those fans who were so invested in the process, were so invested in Embiid getting drafted and him missing 2 years, and Simmons being drafted number 1 overall and him missing a year, and they're so emotionally invested in the players because they're so happy they actually have a competitive team, a team that people talk about now, that I think that Brett Brown is the easy target. When, let's be realistic, Brett Brown has taken the bullets for this franchise for almost a decade now. What, 6 years, 7 years now? Like, when the GM, whether it's Sam Hinkie or Brian Colangelo, was way too busy to talk to the media, or they were getting in fights on TV with, people on NBC Sports Philadelphia because they asked him a tough question. Brett Brown is being asked about injuries, and Brett's trying to do his best to, answer the question honestly, but he's got to look at his face like, dude, that's not my job. So I get it. Brett has been put in a bad situation for years. No one has a negative opinion of him. But at the end of the day, the players got to make the shot. And I'm sorry, I don't care what Brett's system is. If you don't have the basketball common sense, I'm no basketball savant, okay? I'll admit that. I love basketball. I played basketball. I enjoy the game. But I don't consider myself John Wooden over here. But I think I know what spacing looks like. And if Tobias Harris and Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid and Al Horford and Josh Richardson and Mike Scott and James Ennis and the rest of this team can't figure that out without Brett Brown telling them, then that's on them.
Thank you. I've been preaching this forever. Now, there's 2 things I hate that Brett Brown haters say. One, he was brought here to lose. How can you actually think he can win games when it matters? Come on, stop it. When he was told it's time to win, 50-plus seasons back-to-back, and getting to the second round and taking the Raptors to a quadruple doink there in Game 7. So, and I'm told that Nick Nurse is an excellent head coach. Well, how come it took him 7 games and a quadruple doink to lose against Brett Brown? And then 2 is, well, he lost the locker room because he told Ben Simmons to shoot, and Ben Simmons isn't shooting. This goes back to, this is on the players. Ben Simmons not shooting a basketball is on Ben Simmons not shooting a basketball.
Open the show talking about the Eagles. The Eagles versus the Seahawks. Whose injured team is going to win on Sunday? You can find out right here on 97.3 ESPN. Coverage begins following Tony Bruno's count to the kickoff. Eagles versus Seahawks on Sunday afternoon on 97.3 ESPN. A lot of bowl games yesterday. We got to get a Hunter's controversial tweet. Of course, folks can text in about that as well at 609-403. People want to check your tweet beforehand, Hunter. What's your Twitter handle?
At Brodes, BRODES 81.
And my Twitter handle is at Josh Hennig. Mine is less cool and more boring than Hunter's is. We do have a text that come in here that says, Joel Embiid's lack of basketball IQ is killing the team and Brett Brown. This kind of goes right hand when we finished the last hour. We talked about how, for me, I'm getting to the point where I'm getting more frustrated with the players than with Brett. And I'm not saying Brett is the guy either. I'm not going to sit here and act like Brett is the obvious head coach for this job. But I think at some point, you got to blame the players for just basic stuff. And I think that, I don't know if Embiid lacks basketball IQ as much as the fact that we forget that how behind he is. He's really only been playing organized basketball for about 7-8 years.
So you're saying with how many years he's actually played, he could be ahead of schedule when it comes to basketball IQ.
I think his basketball skills are further along than his basketball aptitude development.
Yeah, absolutely, I can say that. He does do some questionable things, and when you look back at it, you say, well, that's because the guy has played basketball for like 6 years. Which, think about this. Think about picking up a sport 6 years ago, and now you're playing at the top level against the most insane athletes in the world.
Who've been playing their entire life.
It's pretty incredible when you really sit back and look at it.
Which shows you how talented he is.
Exactly. It does.
But at the same time, look, you could say that Embiid's lack of basketball IQ is killing the team. But what about Ben Simmons? What about Tobias Harris? Like, we were told coming out of the draft, right, how intelligent Ben is, how high his basketball IQ is. That dude literally makes a pass and then sits in the dunker spot and doesn't move. Like, dude, cut, set a screen, move along the baseline. Don't just stand there like a statue. Like, to me, that's what bothers me more about Ben than anything else. It's not the lack of shooting.
Is he told to do that? I'm just playing devil's advocate. Right.
But at some point, if it's not working, do something else. Like, I have never played basketball in my entire life or watched a basketball game in my entire life where dudes standing still produced good offense. Now, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's something that I don't understand about how the NBA plays basketball versus high school and college games, but I've never have watched an NBA, high school, or college game where a successful offense involves dudes just standing around watching somebody else play. Like, remember Iverson? How frustrating was it that Iverson would be doing his thing and dudes would just be standing around watching him? Like George Lynch and Eric Snow and all these other dudes. Okay, those are real dudes, okay? Those are like whatever guys at the NBA level. Just standing around watching Iverson, eating some popcorn. They might as well just go sit in the stands because Iverson's doing all the work by himself. I feel like the Sixers do the same thing with Embiid sometimes. Embiid gets the ball, and it's like, all right, well, let's see what Embiid does.
Yeah, at some point your basketball instinct would kick in and you start moving around. I put it in comparison to when I was playing college hockey. Sometimes you kind of go off the grid on what you're supposed to do because you know putting yourself in this position helps the team. Or sometimes your instinct just takes over and you start to do something different because you know it will help the team and it will benefit the team in a different way. So instead of standing there, you're right, make a cut. Go out and make a screen. Just do something where your basketball instincts take over. But one thing I want to mention real quick about Ben Simmons, we always talk about how great this roster is, and it's definitely a good roster and better than 23-13 in my opinion. But one of the things that are always thrown out there is we have two transcendent players in Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons. I love Ben Simmons, but he's just not a transcendent player right now. He's not a transcendent player right now. So to use that against Brett Brown, I think is unfair. You have one. You have one in Joel Embiid. Ben Simmons is not that right now in his career. Can he get there? Sure. But he is not it right now. It's funny with Ben Simmons. When someone appreciates him too much, I always downplay how good he is. When someone rips him apart, I always support him for how good he is. He's very frustrating. He's very odd. I can't get a sense on what this guy's all about. But you can't say that he's a transcendent player right now.
609-403-0973. Texter chimes in at 609-403-0973. Says, trade Ben Simmons while he's worth something. Get draft picks or some package deal. First of all, I don't want picks for Ben Simmons. I want a player, okay? If I'm trading Ben, and I'm not saying I want to trade Ben Simmons, but if you tell me you'll take Elton Brand's job right now with the requirement of, okay, I'm going to paint a scenario, so hear me out for a sec. Let's say Elton Brand says, look, I need to go take a family vacation. Something happened, personal life, blah, blah, blah. And the Sixers came to me right now and said, we will pay you $5 million to do this job, but the requirement is you have to trade Ben Simmons.
I'd be excited for
okay?
you, Josh.
So I'd be like, all right, I'm going to do this. I am not picking up the phone and saying, hey, Phoenix, give me picks. Heck no. I want players. I need a specific return on this player. Now, we can debate whether it's multiple players, whether it's a single player, but I do not want a draft pick if I'm picking up the phone, taking calls from teams around the league. Because to me, draft picks don't help me win a championship right now. Now, if I can get a specific player or players in return that help make this team even better, I will make that deal. But in no way am I going to talk to a team and just be like, yo, bro, give me some expiring contracts and picks. Heck no.
I think it's funny when people say, well, trade Ben Simmons for Booker. It's an easy fix. Oh, yeah, because the Phoenix Suns are going to do that. You're talking about how simple and easy of a trade that is because you would do it without even thinking twice.
But they would.
Well, then why would the Suns do it? Exactly.
Right.
So people always throw these names out there. Oh, it's so simple. You trade Ben for this. That's not how this works. It's two ways. I would be interested in I don't want to trade Ben Simmons. I do not want to trade Ben Simmons because I always say this. When players are 27 to 30, that's like their prime and their legit playing time of when they can be serious studs and take over. And that's a long time for Ben Simmons to get there. In 6 years where Ben Simmons can be, it's very, very, very crazy to think he can be something serious in this league. But if I was to trade Ben Simmons, I could look at a Damian Lillard as a potential trade because they're underachieving and they need a new face and they need something new to switch some things up. I would. But once again, would the Portland Trail Blazers do that? Do they see enough in Ben Simmons? We're not the only ones going crazy here. People around the league make fun of Ben Simmons for a reason. The Boston Celtics have a rookie who never made a three-point shot before. They call him Ben Simmons. He's a laughing joke when it comes to the league by that. So people might not just go off on Ben Simmons to make a trade.
I do believe there are a lot of teams that would want to take Ben Simmons just because they know how much he does. And the world is full of people who say, I can do more with said player. The whole world is full of those people. So I'm not going to sit here and act like there's no team out there would want to trade for Ben Simmons.
Sure, they should trade for him.
Now, I think the scenario you brought about Portland is interesting because maybe a team that is down on their luck or is having a rough season may want to shake things up. Now, I don't know if they would offer Lillard for Simmons because I think that they look at Lillard as a franchise, but they may be more inclined to give you C.J. McCollum.
I'm not doing that. If you're telling me Ben Simmons for C.J. McCollum, I'm not doing it. Now,
well, maybe not straight up, but maybe C.J. McCollum and another player, for example.
I would have to really look at what the other players are. But there is this fake rumor, but it seems to be very fake right now that Woj said the Sixers would trade Al Horford for C.J. McCollum, but there's no report on it. It's blowing up all over Twitter. They said, apparently he said it on ESPN, but on ESPN, the only thing that was playing all day were bowl games. So it's...
Well, so Woj does these hits, right? And, I think that knowing as much as I've read and seen of Woj, they do ask him about scenarios. And he does come out and say sometimes, well, this could work because of the contracts. And then he goes, but it's not going to happen. Like we've had Bobby Marks on the Sports Bash numerous times. And Bobby talks about how, look, you can look at 100 ways to make a deal work and the contracts work out, but it doesn't mean it's actually going to work out in reality. So, I think that there are different aspects of Ben Simmons' value, and I think that there are teams around the league that would look to take him on. Now, we have a texter who says Ben Simmons' problem is that he's afraid to fail and afraid to look bad. You can't trade the next LeBron James. Once he gets it, he will be unstoppable. Well, first of all, there have been numerous times that players have been traded before their prime. Okay? Stephon Marbury got traded, 5 times before he finally went to China? We've seen guys like James Harden. He went to Houston. But he was never going to be James Harden in Oklahoma City. He had to be traded to become James Harden. We've seen players of high caliber get traded before. I'm not going to sit here and act like, there's no guarantee that he will be his potential in Philadelphia. And I think that's the bigger question. Do you genuinely believe that 5 years from now, Ben Simmons is going to be at his apex in Philadelphia?
I do. And this is the thing that everyone forgets. Everyone remembers Michael Jordan, the playoff runs, winning championships. How long did it take him to get to the playoffs? How many times did he get swept in the playoffs? We went through the process, so everyone's really disgusted with how long it took to get here. And then they just assume that once we get here, game over, that it takes no more processing, if you will, and it's instant championships all the time. To a degree, I think that, yes, we should be better than what we are right now at 23-13 and 6th in the Eastern Conference. I'm not telling you they shouldn't, but there is something to be said about growing as a player. Everyone talks about how Michael Jordan's the best player ever. Well, he did not just walk into the league and start dominating. He didn't make the playoffs for years. He got swept in the playoffs. Well, there's something to be said about growing as a player. And
yes, I agree. Nobody has ever won a championship that young by themselves. Whose name isn't Magic Johnson when he landed on a team with guys like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and a perennial all-star like Jamal Wilkes. So it's very rare for a young player to walk in and start winning championships. And yes, it took Jordan about 8 years before he won a championship. And as you mentioned, he got swept multiple times. By the way, Jordan was injured his almost entire second year. He hurt his knee his second year. He missed almost the whole season. So it's not like Jordan didn't have his own climb up the mountain before he became who he is. But I'm just curious, at some point, where do we say this is enough? Like, how long do you wait until you say I can't wait any longer?
I mean, I think we got to give him more time than right now, though. This would just be very reactionary to do it after 3 seasons. 3 seasons, and we're just going to give up fully? I just feel like that's ridiculous. Now, let me ask you this question. Why does it seem like when things are going wrong, the answer is to trade everyone, get rid of everyone, start over? Like, the answers never fix the problem. It's get rid of this guy, trade that guy. Al Horford doesn't fit here, get rid of him, even though we just signed him this offseason. The answer is always just reactionary and to move on.
People are impatient.
But that's not the way just sports works. That's not the way business works. No. There's a process. There's a long-term process. There's a short-term process. There's so many things that play into a factor. I find it ridiculous that when things go wrong, the answer is to quit on what's happening now and to change everything. If that's the case, people wanted Doug Peterson fired this season, even though he won a Super Bowl a couple of years ago. People wanted Carson Wentz traded this season, and those same people are thrilled with the Eagles right now. And I can put it to J.J. Redick last year. Everyone wanted J.J. Redick off the floor because he was a liability defensively in the playoffs. Now, because we don't have a shooter, it's the Sixers' fault for letting him walk. It's mind-blowing to me. Mind-blowing.
Ed in KMA Courthouse chimes in at 609-403-0973. Ed says, in today's NBA landscape, it is inevitable that Brett Brown gets fired. Management puts too much emphasis on players of creating a team with a leader, being the coach, that has real power. Well, and Ed, not that you're wrong, and I appreciate you texting in and listening. The reason why is because the NBA is about the name on the back of the jersey. The NFL is about the name on the front of the jersey, okay? It's the idea that in the NBA, the players have the power because the players are the most marketable entity in the league. Remember, and David Stern passed away yesterday, and our thoughts and condolences go to him and his family after he had a brain hemorrhage a couple weeks ago. But David Stern, if you go back in history, the reason why the NBA became the NBA is because he went to the TV networks and he went to the advertising people, the Nikes and all the people who now advertise the NBA for years, right? He went to them and said, don't sell the team, sell the player. He had to convince the world, because the world was like, why don't we care about the NBA? People don't realize that in the 70s and the early 80s, people didn't care about the NBA the way they do now. Like, the NBA wasn't the second. They were probably fourth. In many markets, hockey was way more. The Flyers at one point were so huge in the 70s, people didn't really care about George Gervin, George McGinnis playing for the Sixers. No!
It's because we were winning Stanley Cups, baby.
Right, but in the
Not
NBA,
anymore, though.
and the NBA was on tape delay. The finals. Like, that's where the NBA was. So the reason why the NBA landscape gives so much emphasis to players is because the NBA realizes that they went from being third-rate league behind the NFL and Major League Baseball, and some markets hockey, to being a multi-billion-dollar business because David Stern went to the marketers and the networks and said, market the player. Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, Dr. J, Michael Jordan, Reggie Miller, versus the Knicks. It wasn't the Pacers versus the Knicks. It was Reggie versus the Knicks in the 90s. So that's why they put so much emphasis on players, because that's where the money is. And you mentioned business, Hunter. If you're a smart businessman, you're not going to sacrifice your cash cow because, the coach needs to have real power. That's silly.
Yeah, I'm on the same page as you, and we have been agreeing a lot today. Today is the agreement show until we get to that college football take, which eventually will happen. But listen, the Sixers are such a hot item here. Tom from the Villas texts in and says, I like Brett Brown. He isn't the person to take this team and its players to the next level. It seems like they keep making the same mistakes every year, and that is absolutely a realistic statement.
Yes.
They are making the same mistakes, and we're not saying that Brett Brown is perfect. We've said that multiple times throughout the show. He is not perfect. I think we just look at it and we feel as if the players get a free pass, and we don't like that. We don't like that the players are getting no hate for not playing hard enough, for not being prepared as professional athletes.
Right. It's you want a balanced vitriol. The hate mob throwing rocks figuratively at the Sixers target Brett Brown all the time, and they don't target Joel, Ben, Tobias, and the other players as much because people love Joel. He's a fun-loving guy. He seems like a great person. People love Mike Scott because he's gritty and scrappy, and people like Tobias because of all the charity work that he does. I mean, Tobias Harris probably has given away already a tenth of his contract at this point. The charity work is ridiculous. Not ridiculous in the fact that it's bad, but it's incredible, impressive, ridiculous.
Yeah, I don't think anyone thought that you meant that in a negative way at all.
Well, I gotta correct myself because people hear what they want to hear sometimes.
Yeah, definitely.
But I do think Tom from the Villas makes a point. Maybe Brett Brown isn't the guy to take his team to the next level, but I don't know if you bring in David Fizdale. Or people will keep talking about Mark Jackson and Van Gundy. I don't think either of those guys come into the Sixers. But whoever the coach may be, I don't know if that coach is convincing Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid about spacing, because at some point the players got to do it themselves.
It's very frustrating. With that being said, though, I think it's time to go to the tweet. What do you think?
Yeah, well, we got Eric Edholm coming up in 10 minutes. So please read your tweet in context before I start ripping you for it.
Yeah, so I'll go with the tweet. I'll defend my take, and then the floor is yours to destroy me if you would like to attempt to.
Oh, I can destroy you.
I tweeted, I think a bowl game system is awful. It's more football, which equals more money, so I understand why it's a thing, but it's so dumb. Imagine if the Browns played the Giants before the NFL playoffs for a game that meant absolutely nothing. Oh, I'm really running to my TV for that. Now, what I'm saying is, I get why the football's on TV. I watch the football, so I'm being a hypocrite because I say it's dumb, yet I watch it because I love the sport of football. I love sports in general. I watch it. But for Georgia, and I'll start here, the college football playoffs made bowl games less important. When there were no college football playoffs, I see the value in a Sugar Bowl, a Rose Bowl, a Peach Bowl, and all these bowl games. Because there's so many teams that they need to play for something. I understand the logic behind it. But now that there's a college football playoff, for Georgia to be number 5 and to play Baylor at number 7, when their mindset going into the season was we want to win a national championship, that Sugar Bowl to me means nothing. And it should mean nothing to the players as well, because should Georgia go back to their campus afterwards with this, woohoo, we won the Sugar Bowl, when all their fans wanted to win a playoff matchup before the season even started? Those seem like a participation trophy. Now, I think that there's value in it when it comes to the lower tier teams. That's why my fix is a Power 5 college football playoff, and then you can have the other conferences, the Midwestern conferences, the Big Sky, whatever you want to go to from there.
And the Mountain West Conference.
Yes, and they can have their own college football playoff as well. So I do think there needs to be some sort of playoffs or extra game for those lower tier teams that don't have a shot for the playoffs. But those Power 5 conferences, they shouldn't be all woohoo about a Birmingham Bowl.
All right, let's stop there. First of all, I will give you there are too many bowls. Okay? I think it was, 41, 42 bowls this year? It is too many. So I'll give you that. And some of it doesn't feel like a little bit of a thanks for playing participation trophy to it. But the history of the bowls is totally different than what you're talking about, because you're placing professional football sensibilities, the value of a playoff. You play to win the game, blah, 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 on to college football. College football didn't have a playoff system until recently. For decades, your goal as the winner of the Big Ten, the winner of the SEC, the winner of the whatever the conference was, the Southwest Conference back in the day, or the Big 8 back in the day, whatever the conference was, your goal was to get to a bowl game and to win a bowl game. It has been built into the fabric of college football programs. Ohio State, Wisconsin to win the Rose Bowl, or Georgia, Alabama to win the Sugar Bowl. You didn't have a national championship game to play for. So you can't just rip out decades of history and tradition and system just because Clemson is going to play LSU for the national championship game. The Sugar Bowl has value to Georgia because it has value to the fans, the football program. The players are recruited to Georgia not just because they want to win a national championship, because they're going to be on TV, but because they're going to play on the big stage. They're going to have the opportunity to show the NFL who they are. And for example, you watch that Georgia-Baylor game, and Jake Fromm, I think, actually helped his case as an NFL prospect. Whereas his last game he played, he did not help his case as an NFL prospect. If it wasn't for that game, you could argue that we would look at Jake Fromm differently going into the NFL. Same thing with George Perkins going into next year. Perkins now viewed as one of the top wide receivers in college football because he had a 13-catch game.
If college baseball had a 3-game series with 2 teams that got knocked out of the
but there's a huge difference.
It's dumb.
Every sport you just mentioned in college, what do they all have? A postseason tournament.
They do.
College football at the FBS level is the one that doesn't.
They have the playoff now. That's my point.
That's not
the
a tournament.
Playoff looks down upon bowl games now.
When it does in some ways, but until there is an equal out number of teams that make said playoff versus said power teams, as I mentioned, if you take the 5 power conferences, 5 times 12 is 60. So until there is 12 out of 60 teams that make it, the bowl games still have value. And there's a history to that. There's a value to that. These teams have been playing in these games for decades. College football just celebrates 150th year. You got 150 years of tradition you're drawing off of. Those other sports that have tournaments, that's why they can have a real, they don't have bowl games because they're actually playing a postseason.
I get it. Listen, I don't think that Georgia should go home today happy.
I think they should because
why?
Because one, it's an honor to get to the Sugar Bowl. It's an honor to be selected on the New Year's Day game. Number 2, in the past, there's always been teams that don't have a chance to win the national championship. Every year in the past, there was always a team that didn't have a chance. And you look at Georgia, and they said, all right, we lost the SEC championship game. We didn't get a chance to go to the national title game. We get to go to Sugar Bowl. It's got a lot of history. Our fans love this. We get to go experience this for a week. It's a great trip for the kids.
To me, see, that's a participation trophy to me, though. Oh, look at this. Woohoo. It's a fake happy. It's not a real happy. Oh, we get to go here. We get to have a fun time. Well, I want to win a championship. Right? I mean, it seems as if we're satisfied. We get to play in a game.
Go back to hockey.
That's my point. I get where you're coming from, though. I do understand that it's a tradition. It's been there for a while. It creates revenue, and that's the big thing. All these bowl games, there's so much money involved.
It's also a great time for the fans.
Right, but that's where the participation trophy part of it comes into me. Is the LSU game and is the LSU Clemson about the fans, or is that game about winning a championship?
That's about winning a championship.
Okay, so I'm telling you that all those other games is a participation trophy. It's about the fans. It's about a good time. It's about enjoying one more game of football. Woohoo!
Like it's a bad thing?